Welcome back to
Ami's house.
Michael. So much to discuss. The internet moves way too fast these days, and we had Passover in between.
So we recorded with Natasha about talking about Dave Smith. He hadn't even done Rogan yet with Douglas Murray.
No.
It kind of happened to cover that too.
Yes, it did.
But a lot's happened since we last spoke to each other. And we don't speak off camera. People don't know that. I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, this episode is going to be the reaction of Douglas Murray versus Dave Smith on Joe Rogan, and all the ensuing reactions to that I found quite fascinating, even as I processed it and have gone through a different sort of, for going from kind of one side of how I feel about it to another side and back. And so
what was your first first impression when you listened to Douglas Murray and Dave Smith on Rogan? Because I remember I saw that come up on my feed and immediately texted you. I think it was the day before Pesach. I was like, "Oh my God, look what just came out." What was your first response?
Full honesty, for me, watching it, I think I felt like a lot of the pro-Israel, pro-Zionist people felt, which was this, wow, finally, Dave Smith is actually getting confronted and called out as being someone who's interested in these ideas, but doesn't actually have, on-the-ground experience with it, and has versed himself in literature and articles and headlines, but is now confronted by somebody who has authority and expertise and experience in this. And that did get exposed. And to me, I was processing it as, it looks like Dave has been humbled and is a little intimidated. And even it felt like Daddy Douglas has come home to spank the boys and get them in line. There was a part of me that felt that, mainly because I felt like really Dave has gone on for the last 18 months fairly unchallenged or improperly challenged in a lot of ways. And I felt that while I can totally understand why maybe using words like trust the experts and authority is bad strategy going on into a place like Rogan, into an environment like that, Douglas does have a lot of authority and real world experience on this issue. So what people don't realize is there's no question that Douglas has more on the ground firsthand experience with Israel, Gaza. And just to see some of that exposed to me was very satisfying to see, and I think needed. And then I think actually just challenging the points about what it's actually like there, and challenging the history of some of the things that had been spoken about on Rogan with Dara Cooper and Ian Carroll, and then challenging that. I think there were some strategic errors that now we can get to. But initially, I just liked the fact that there was some pushback from a proper person who could debate these issues, and also somebody who could be clever, entertaining, and funny in doing so. I think there were parts of the episode I found refreshing, because Douglas is not only well-versed academically and educationally, but also has the actual on-the-ground experience. So it's not just academic knowledge in the abstract, but real-world knowledge and experience, and also is clever, and therefore can make his arguments digestible and fun, and he's experienced in that way. That's how I initially took it.
Yeah. As you're talking, it's occurring to me that at the first half of the episode when they talked about Ukraine, I was like, I felt the tension in the room. Oh God, it's him versus these two buddies. This is going. He came in here to basically tell them your whole project is bunk. Idiots talking about stuff they don't know, and how are they supposed to react to that? And then when they moved on to Israel, I also had the same feeling. Finally, as you're talking, it's this weird thing we do, where I think we all experienced this during COVID, where we all thought that, after 2 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, maybe 3, at some point, it'll just go back to the way it was before COVID. And we were all waiting for it. When are we going to start doing in-person meetings? When are we going to start going back? There's this feeling of okay, Uncle Doug's going to come in and set the world back to where it was before October 7th, where nobody was publicly anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Finally, we're back. And as you're and I think like we're coming to terms a little bit, and we'll talk about this next with the reaction to the reaction, which is that like I think maybe we're all getting the feeling of like there's no going back.
Mm-hmm.
Like no one's setting any records straight. No one's changing minds, especially with like a lecture like that.
Well,
we're not going back to a time where Joe's like, you know what, Doug, you're right. You're totally right. I don't know, Dave, get out of here. I don't know what I was thinking.
Well, here's what I'll say to that. A couple things. I do think more of that could have been possible with a different strategic approach in having these conversations. I get why what's not going to work is posturing from a place of because I'm an authority and because I'm an expert, everything I say is true and I don't have to demonstrate why. The problem, as I watch the reaction to it, is both echo chambers. Team Dave Smith thought Dave killed. Team Douglas thought he destroyed. And I'm like, well, that can't be true. Like, if the dividing line is such that no one was moved at all, if anything, both sides were pushed further away. And I guess I include Joe in that category, seeing as how he, a week later, has Tim Dillon on and they're giggling about it. I'm like, well, if the goal was to make Joe take these ideas more seriously, I don't think he's taking them more seriously. So if anything, both sides went like this and each side cheered each other on, thinking one destroyed the other. That means something went really wrong, right? As opposed to both sides going like this, interesting, and reaching a new level of understanding and clarity. Both sides went like this and went, you destroyed. I'm like, something went wrong. And I'm trying and since thinking, oh, this felt great. And then seeing how it resonated and lack thereof didn't resonate. Now I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm not going to say one side, like Douglas went in and didn't do it right completely. And Dave, I'm not going to take that a different side, but it's more like trying to reassess from a macro bird's eye view, like what went wrong here.
So you think someone could have come in not to set the clock back, but to set a new clock.
Correct.
To be like,
in other words,
and Douglas didn't accomplish it.
I don't think so. I think Douglas accomplished certain things.
Douglas Murray. I'm not on a first name basis.
Douglas Murray accomplished certain things in exposing that, like, it's in fact true that Dave hasn't been to the Middle East, and that means something. In the fact that he's talked about this subject for the last 18 months and has never been there. So a lot of his information is secondhand. But then the mistake is to take that information and run with it as to say, we can never comment on any places we've never been. And use that as the sticking point rather than as a moment, as an anchor to say, okay, well, I have been, and I have seen a lot of this. What are your perceptions? I'm genuinely curious what your perceptions are versus what I've seen. And let's try to square that, because you clearly have a perception of something. And rather than trying to get you and expose you as an ignoramus and put you in a defensive posture, things I've seen do not comport with the reality and the narrative that's been painted to you of Gaza being a concentration camp. Now, if that were to have been said and presented that way, the conversation from there, I think, gets much more constructive and less combative. Well, I've read that. Okay, that's totally fair. I could see why from drone footage, from what you're seeing, it would look that way. It would look that way to me if I never seen it. But once I went there and I spoke to certain soldiers and found out that all these apartment buildings that are demolished, it turns out had secondary ammunitions in them, it completely gave me a new perspective as to why something might look a certain way and that might not be the reality. And it's easy to be persuaded by horrible footage. Who wouldn't be? And drone footage. But when you're there, it benefits to have that realities. And like, if it's more about us both winning when you're having a discussion, debate, conversation, even when you disagree, if one person is moved and learns something a little different, when you're not like debating in the sense of like sports combat in front of an audience where one side's just trying to win, but it's more of a discussion, which is what Rogan's space is. It's a place for discussion. Even when debates happen, it's like you can get somewhere that I think both sides go like this rather than like this. And even if this side was where I was and it felt good, like overall, it's possible that maybe, like you said, a new paradigm shift could have happened where Douglas could have used the fact that, look, it's not that just because Douglas has degrees, authority, and experience, that makes everything he says true. But everybody can acknowledge that it means that he might have a better idea of what the truth is in a situation that he's seen more of it up close. than secondhand sources.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't, if you're Dave Smith, talk about it, express feelings about it, be passionate about it. You're not disqualified, but there's a bigger grain of salt that comes with what you say than with what Douglas says, because he's conveying certain realities on the ground that he's seen firsthand. That is valuable. But I think being exclusionary about it was the problem, rather than like, we can both learn from each other, because I can learn how you're processing something and what's being conveyed to you, and you can learn from me what I've actually seen. Right. And I think that would have gone over, at least for the two people in the room, a lot better.
And I wonder what Douglas Murray gamed out. Like, how would Dave Smith respond? Like, you're right, I'm going to shut my podcast down. You're right, I'm going to stop talking. Like what, unless he just sort of accepted defeat and submitted and like ran away with his tail between his legs. Like, I wonder what Douglas Murray envisioned for that conversation.
I think it was, I don't really want to debate Dave Smith, but if this is like what I have to do, that's I think that's what Eric Weinstein said on Piers Morgan, which was like, I'm coming into this with this with this condition that I have to debate him. So like, I'm going to have, what do you mean by other?
But it seemed to me like this is my theory about it. Mm-hmm. He thought about all the ways he could approach it. And what he decided to do was, I'm not going to debate any one point. Mm-hmm. I'm going to sort of just diminish his authority on this subject generally.
Right.
And so I'm just going to sit here. He'll make points and I'll undercut them with like the larger meta point of like, this is weird. You shouldn't be talking about this type of thing. No one like you should be talking about this sort of thing. How do you know this? There's no way you could know this, et cetera, et cetera, which was really interesting. But at the same time, I wonder for someone who's pretty brilliant and like a professional debater, like you also game out the response to that. So like, shouldn't he have seen that coming? Or perhaps he didn't care. Perhaps like he was just like, I'm going to go in and make my point, and that's that.
And I think it was also just to issue the warnings of like playing with these kinds of figures that Joe's been having on, and these kind of old ideas that have been put to rest. Like that, there was a part of that to me that came through and was resonant. But I think taking the position of not really being so familiar with those characters, but at least like, I think he was more familiar with what those, like what a Darryl Cooper or an Ian Carroll had been peddling without them specifically. So it got lost in the weeds where Joe and Dave are defending Darryl Cooper, who they're fans of his like hours plus of podcasts and work. And Douglas is making a slightly different point, which is that this other stuff that he's been mentioning has very, very like has a history and it's been debunked, and you should have some people on to balance it out. But it's the word should that I think is also problematic. Like, here's what you should do, like people just don't respond that well to that kind of strategy.
Did you see him? The epitome of that attitude was him and Sam Harris talking this week. Did you watch that? Douglas Murray and Sam Harris.
You'd be proud of me. I watch all full length podcasts now. I can't not do it. I just fast forward. I just watch tons of full length, and it's killing me because of time. But I don't just do clips anymore. I can't.
Wow.
So I will say this.
What did you think of it?
I just think like both sides are missing the important points made. And maybe that's the fault of the people in the room that didn't articulate them properly or package them. Maybe Douglas packaged it in a certain way that turned people off, but they're missing what he's saying. And perhaps the Douglas side is missing what like Dave Smith and Joe Rogan were trying to convey. At least it was mostly him versus Dave. And Dave Smith was saying like, in other words, the whole argument from authority or expertise, the conversation around expertise. I made a bunch of videos about this because I was like, guys, the problem is in a post-COVID world, like, and in a world where expertise is paired with political power, and we're all traumatized from experts who got it wrong, and there were political consequences for that. That's fair because you're putting a public health official in charge of economic decisions, and you're cross purposes of people doing things that they're experts in one thing like pulmonology or medicine, and then they're trying to make sweeping policy for a population, and it goes disastrously wrong. Fair enough. When you pair the expert class and the elites and give them political power over us, that's very different than authority and expertise in general as something we appeal to every single day. Every time you put in a light bulb, every time you call a plumber, every time you hire a musician. Why don't you just hire anybody who just reads about music? Like, we all know this is true. Joe, and I said Joe's show, one of the cornerstones is that he's had experts in all these other kinds of fields to share their expertise, their knowledge, and things that he's just curious about. And in fields, like it's very easy for them to question experts in fields that Joe and Dave are not experts in. You know, like they can question that expertise, but in fields that they're experts in, like comedy or MMA, if somebody was talking a bunch of nonsense about it or just writing articles about it, but had never been to a comedy club, spoken to comedians, immersed themselves in that or participated in it, they would be able to see that and call that out, and they would take their positions and opinions about it a little more seriously. And it doesn't also mean, by the same token, misunderstanding what Douglas is saying in that, or maybe Douglas said it sloppily or inartfully, that people can't talk about it. Everyone can talk about anything. The question is, how should other people process it? Like, how seriously should you take Dave Smith's ideas? How big should the grain of salt be? What merit do they have? What are they based on? And then at the end of the day, the ideas should speak for themselves. So if Dave can have a right idea, he can have a wrong idea. He can say something that Douglas would say and agree with or not agree with. Douglas' experiences shouldn't matter to the merit of the ideas in a sense, right? But then you got to demonstrate that, and you got to show that and not tell. And there was a problem on the episode in terms of telling instead of showing. Now, I think Douglas did a little bit of showing later on in the episode as he unpacked certain realities about Gaza and the history and warfare. But it came a little late, you know, after things had already kind of been sealed off. So show, don't tell is a big motto I like, because you can demonstrate. But at the end of the day, it's like everyone's missing what Douglas's point was too, which is obviously he knows more about what's going on the ground there. And and his authority and experience and knowledge is something we should appeal to and gain from and benefit from. Like,
I'll say two things.
Yeah.
I think everything you said was very well said and well articulated. I especially like the point about the MMA, like someone coming in and talking about that. I think what we saw happening what we saw happening with like news shows where Candace was talking to Brianna Joy Gray and like Breaking Point's bringing on Norman Finkelstein and like all these media personalities who weren't supposed to be friends with people on like the far right or the far left to them, were all of a sudden had like friends now because like Israel broke it. So like
strange bedfellows. Yeah.
Right. So because of Israel now, Brianna Joy Gray and Candace are a team now. And I found something weird with Rogan where it's like, and then also combine that with something like, for example, I heard like Ezra Klein say where he's like, I read this author and I've read him for decades about Israel, and he's so poignant, and everything he says about Israel is so insightful and well researched and everything, but he's so off about Hamas and October 7th. And like, he really doesn't understand Hamas and what they really want, and they just want to live in peace. And you're like, oh, like instead of saying this person has been right about everything up until now, so I'm going to defer to their expertise about October 7th and Hamas. He goes to the left and go like, oh, he must be right about everything except for this one thing. So
was the author being pro-Hamas or anti? And
he's like an Israeli author being anti-Hamas, who's like usually very, very left-wing.
That was a question I would have for a Dave Smith too. It's like, look at the panel you're on right now. Look at all these people you've disagreed with on everything.
Right. So now you see it with Rogan now, where he's like, I've had Douglas Murray on for years. I've trusted his opinion on everything except for this one thing. Now he must be way off about.
But like, I don't think he necessarily thought Douglas was even off. That's the whole thing. It's not that he thought his opinions were necessarily wrong, but I think he maybe took issue with his strategy and approach.
But I think
like he didn't like him having to talk down to Dave Smith and say, you can't talk about this.
But I think the bigger sort of meta Rogan question here was like, it seems to me that his mind is pretty made up about what's going on in Gaza, and like, I liked what Eric Weinstein said on Piers Morgan about why he thought that was the setup. I think I liked what he said. I know you don't agree, but he said that Douglas wanted to promote his book on Rogan. Rogan said like, I'm a little uncomfortable with you coming on to talk about Israel and the way you talk about it, unless I don't really know how to push back. So if you want to come and talk about Israel, I need my brilliant buddy Dave Smith here to push back on you, because I don't feel comfortable doing it alone.
Yeah. And my read is different than that, but go ahead.
Right. But I think generally Joe's made up his mind about what's going on in Gaza, And instead of deferring to someone like Douglas Murray, who he defers to on everything else, all of a sudden he's like, well, I guess this is the one thing he's wrong about.
But the way Joe opened the episode was, look, I respect you both. I like both your ideas. You've had a lot of impact on me. And I think maybe it's also just a boring thing for someone like Joe to say, I can have another guy on and he can give his whole slew of opinions on this stuff. Because remember, like, yes, Dave Smith spends a lot of time talking about this, but I think he also falls into Joe's comedy community and purview, and they speak about a lot of things. And this is one of the things that Dave, like, he doesn't have Dave on just to be like, let's talk about Israel. Obviously, he wants to talk about the politics and the wonky stuff, because that's what makes Dave maybe unique as a comedian to other comedians that would come on. But he didn't have pro-Palestinian scholar Dave Smith on first, and then Douglas, and then he wouldn't have Douglas on to counter. He had his friend Dave Smith on, who's passionate about these issues and happens to be on this side on the Israel-Gaza conflict. And then, instead of just talking to Douglas Murray, he was like, let's have a debate. He's hosted a few debates in the past on certain things. And the truth is, look at everybody's reaction. It was far more impactful and enticing. Everybody gathered around to watch it. So let's not deny that was a cool event in internet history that we all wanted to gather around and see finally ideas square up against each other. So that was maybe an opportunity that I didn't think was missed at first, but maybe was in seeing the fallout. So that I take it as like, I don't think Joe's mind's ever fully made up. That's part of what makes it. That's part of the appeal. It's like he's open.
But that brings me to my second point. I think since COVID, and something I sort of have been tracking since Trump got elected, like, it seems that Joe has actually made up his mind on a lot of issues, and he's not quite as curious as he used to be. Like, he sort of made up his mind about vaccines. He's made up his mind about COVID. He's made up his mind about the Middle East and the war in Ukraine. And like, he's not having people with like radically different opinions coming in to like teach him something he may not otherwise know. You sort of know what you're getting now with him. And he's sort of like, to me, I'm just talking as a fan. I'm not debating this because I don't know, but just as a fan, it seems like he's a little bit. I mean, he helped get Trump elected. He is sort of this like this mainstream media organization now in a lot of ways. It just sort of it's not quite. It doesn't quite seem like the same project it used to be. So I'm wondering like how entrenched he'll get in the opinions he spent so much time formulating publicly, and to the point where like he's never going to change his mind on certain things, and it's not quite as interesting to watch as it used to be.
I hear that, except all of a sudden I also don't like not to push back, but at the same time I would just say that like, you can't look at Joe as your hero 1 week when he's like doing the things you want him to be doing and are in line with your views, and then he's the villain in the next instance when but I feel like there's people who championed what his show was about in a time when it aligned with their values of being like either conservative, and his show being sort of pushing back against wokeness and woke leftism and the censorship culture of the anti-free speech woke leftist movements that were ascendant for so long. And then we come out of that, and now he's finding himself, which I think, on the wrong side of certain issues, but that doesn't make him or the show or the platform the problem necessarily, but it is worth confronting and calling out and saying like, we can engage with this. Like, and that's not giving a pass necessarily, but I also find it to be disingenuous and not it's just not cool to say like, this person who's provided value in this space by providing a space in which that curiosity can be open to like the best ideas rising to the top in a way, at least it provides that opportunity. And he's willing to hear that out. Like, think about it this way. He's had Peterson on today, and I don't know who's on next week, but 3 more pro-Israel people, and all of a sudden everyone goes, okay, never mind. Like, come on. Like, that's what I mean. Like, you say I get what, but that's so, your position is pretty malleable depending on where the tide goes on a show and who he decides to talk to. And if there's enough of a consistency in a different direction, then that's just what that is. And his curiosity sort of leads the way on that. And I take that as sort of genuine. And I know it always looks like I'm like simping for Joe, but like, I'm just recognizing like that part of why I'm been a fan is because I think he's always kind of stayed true, at least to what he thinks is the right thing, and holds his integrity to high regard and wants to keep the that's what I think the appeal has been. That's why I've liked it. I don't know if that's changed, even if a certain narrative has appealed to him more than the narrative or the truth that I would like. What I think is interesting is like when for people's temperament, I think Joe's temperament in particular and is like exploring the truth behind the truth, right? And the piece of of Peterson that I saw, I'm still making my way through the episode, but one of the things he pointed to is like, you always let your curiosity guide you, which is a great virtue. But at what point are you like getting past what may be common sense or like truth to think there's another truth beyond that? Because when you start to question everything, all of a sudden, all the walls fall down and all the stability collapses and you're in a total world of chaos. Because maybe the truth beneath the truth is that everything you've heard about Gaza is Hamas propaganda. And that'll be the big conspiracy. Oh my God, did you realize? I had no idea this was all totally Hamas propaganda, that we all got played. Like right now they think they've gotten played by the Zionist-controlled, AIPAC-controlled West. That's sort of what's winning in this battle of ideas here. But maybe the real like unpacking truth beneath that is the fact that no. Like Qatar and the Hamas propaganda arm that built up this mass sympathy for like the Hamas dead baby strategy of putting their population in harm's way worked on all of you and you don't realize it yet. And it's people's job to like go in there and make that case, because if you're trying to figure out how to reach people where they are, it's the truth beneath the truth. That's the actual truth is still what we're after. You know?
I do think that's how it'll shake out ultimately, because that is the truth.
Exactly.
I think after enough time passes, everyone figures out the truth because that's how the world works. I think the same way COVID, his stance on COVID, it aged so well that he's 2 or 3 times bigger than he was before COVID. Like he nailed that. And if you're a media organization, you need to nail the big stories. And I think he's not nailing this one. And I think it's going to age badly, and he's going to look back on it, and it's not going to be like a triumphant period of years for him. It's going to actually be like a lower point for him when it all shakes out.
But
again,
speaking
I'm not judging it. I'm just saying, like,
as an observer, I think though, speaking to the reaction, the mistake a lot of these sort of pro-Israel Zionist communities out there I'm seeing make is like presuming that off of the Douglas Murray episode, Joe's somehow having this meltdown when he's giggling with Tim Dillon the next week. I'm like, guys,
what'd you think of that?
What was it? What did I think of him kibitzing with Tim about it?
I
liked it. Yeah, I liked it. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Is it the best look to tease one of your previous guests? Probably not the classiest move, but at the same time, it's also just indicative of like how he processed that episode, I guess, which is just more disturbing in general. I'm like, oh, clearly like the takeaway for him, but it's also just a moment with Tim, and him and Tim are riffing, and you know how that goes. It's like, I think that like, I think starvation in Gaza is a little worse than a podcast. Maybe I could be wrong. Like I think part of it is that we might be missing the angle that in that world, when you're not close to this issue or sensitive to it, like they're kibitzing about the same way when Joe Rogan and Smith were like, he was like, Candace, she's hitting all the third rails. And Sam Harris and to speak about the Sam Harris episode, is so appalled by that. It's like, they're not celebrating her ideas. They're celebrating the fact that the Daily Wire tried to get rid of Candace and fired her and whatever. And then she ends up blowing up even more since then, seemingly. Right. Yeah. And that's kind of a funny unintended consequence. And they're laughing at that fact of it. And maybe it's not funny to you subjectively because it's a serious matter, but they're not celebrating her ideas. Like you have to just remember like what this space is. It's being playful. And I get why you can object to at its core. Like he's not saying she's hitting all the third rails and she's right. She's saying that he's just taking pleasure in this theater that's playing out. Like that's what's happening there. But I think to the point about him and Tim Dillon kibitzing about it and laughing about it, I mean, I think it says more about maybe the shortcomings of the episode beforehand than anything else. That's what, like, it's don't hate the player, hate the game. It's like, all right, if that's the takeaway that they're gonna get, but have you been? Meaning, did Joe Rogan miss the point that Douglas was trying to make? Yeah. but Douglas made it in that way, and so it's understandable why he would miss it.
Yeah.
As opposed to, well, of course, if you've been somewhere, man, like you're going to know more. Like I totally appreciate that.
Yeah.
But maybe he objected to his posture and tactic more than the substance. And him joking about it with Tim Dillon. Of course, Tim is going to say the thing that you can't do and joke about the thing you can't do.
I mean, I think everything you're saying is right. It's hard for me. I'm very humorless about this stuff. Like probably for the first time in my life. Like I get it. I understand it.
I get it.
But it's hard for me. It's hard for me to watch a guy I'm a real big fan of, Tim Dillon, like step into that. Yeah, I don't know. It's very hard for me. It's very difficult for me.
But you enjoy.
He said, like, people will disappoint you.
Yes, but Michael, I will caution you. I will caution you. When he made a mockery of things that we were on the same side politically of, we loved it. So if he's losing the plot on this one, and you want to reach back at somebody and say, like, what's the way to do it? I'm not saying you're doing this, but is it really? It is a little depressing. I get it. I get it.
I agree with you. I'm not the guy to reach out to him. I mean, I hope one day I do have the opportunity to talk to him, but I'm not. It's. I think I'm too emotional about it. It's
yeah. And I with one thing that's kind of baffling, and Douglas made this point too. It's so startling and baffling to me that, like, you look around and just look at the sides taking up with the Palestinian cause and the Gaza cause. When you look at the encampments, the destruction, the damage, the protests, the anti-Western sentiment, the radical Islamism paired with Marxism and anti-capitalist, anti-Western people who want to break into Grand Central. Like, this is not the Rogan crowd, right? So there's just something going horribly wrong, because it's not like Rogan or Dillon are in any way in line with that community either. Like, how could all these communities who have nothing in common with each other, like, how could somebody like that, who believes in every different principle, completely antithetical to their principles, get the Israel-Gaza thing wrong? Like, that's what Sam Harris pointed out. Like, to him, it's so morally clear who has the moral high ground here. For people like Sam Harris or Bill Maher, or when we talk about it.
But I mean, well, that's an interesting point. That of like, what camp are they in? I don't think they're in the, like, take over Grand Central Station.
No, they're not. That's what's confusing.
I mean, they're probably in what, like, maybe we can call a new camp of like, guys, this has just got to stop. I'm sick of seeing this shit on, like, TikTok. Like,
I think I call it the movable middle. The movable middle that is responding to sort of like an onslaught of whatever it is they're seeing, the optics of war, the realities of war, and attributing it. It's easy. When I think about it, it's like, you're right. Like, human suffering and the cost of war now being broadcast all the time in this thing is horrible to see. And the question isn't that it's happening or not happening. It's who's accountable for it and who are we attributing.
And it's a very like, I'll call it the movable middle, who's like simplifying a very complex thing, as Noam Weissman says this really well, and complexifying a very simple thing. And you can't blame them for it. They're not scholars. They're not consuming the same information we're consuming. But yeah, they exist and they're powerful and they have a powerful voice. And it's like, it's a little bit, to me, it's the most disturbing thing probably that's happened.
I would just want to sit down and say, like, to a Joe or a Dave or anybody in this camp, I don't even put them in the same exact camp, but I'd be like, look, what you're seeing is being presented to you as, like, Israel's just mass slaughter and destruction of innocent population. And what I'd want to just break it down into real terms is, like, you're in your house, right? And right on the border of where you live, your children, family members, community members have been taken captive and captured by a brutal terrorist organization. And they are now hiding in civilian homes at gunpoint, keeping people in civilian homes at gunpoint, schools, mosques, civilian areas, and they're firing at your house, and members of your community and maybe even your children or family members are there, and they're continuing to fire at your house and committed to attacking you. What do you do? It keeps coming from the same area. What do you do? The choice, what do you do in that situation? Like, do you fight back? They would say, we'd kill them. And rescue our house. Like, put in the position, like, that's what the choice is.
Or put another way, like, Dave, we're gonna rent you a house in Kibbutz Be'eri, and you have to live there for 2 years. What would make you feel comfortable living there with your family? Like, when we have a ceasefire and you're gonna live in that kibbutz, what'll make you feel safe?
I mean, it's all these scenarios, because when you put it down to the brass tacks of like what's really going on, one of the things I like that Douglas Murray said is every single one of these houses had Hamas tunnel, these apartments that collapsed. When you look at the destruction of Gaza, like every other apartment complex has tunnels in it leading to the terrorist network underground. And a lot of them are filled with munitions that blow up even on a precision airstrike that you all say you'd be fine with if it was more precision. You claim that that's all you want. And it presents like Israel's just indiscriminately slaughtering people, but you have munitions in these apartments that go off from a precision strike and take down the whole apartment complex. That's often the case too. I was talking to a IDF commander who showed me images on his phone of all of these houses in Lebanon that had been leveled, and in every single one it was just filled with munitions, not people. Like, people didn't even live there. But look, there is also obviously the case that Natasha pointed out of human suffering, but that's happening for sure. I wouldn't deny that, but it's sort of just the framing of how they're portraying it. And I'm like, you are in your house, and on the border of where you live is a terrorist organization that has your children, your family members, and they're continuing and committed to continuing attacking you, and doing so, you would not hold back. So
No.
I don't know. There's something gone wrong in a communication gap here, and I hope we can figure out a way to fix it.
Same here.
What did you think overall of the Sam Harris Douglas unpacking thing? You think it just made it further siloed them into elitism?
It's really interesting to me what's going on. Like, this disassociation of like what used to be the independent media, intellectual dark web, of like the grandfathers of it and everyone else. Like, it's really interesting to see. Sam Harris and Joe Rogan were bundled together as like two of the same people, when in fact, like, Sam Harris is a very different creature than Joe Rogan, and has very different ideals and values and intellect. And it's interesting to see that after how long's it been? 8 years. Like, that is starting to dissolve. They're starting as they're no longer pushed into one corner together by the mainstream media, and now they have become much more mainstream. They're no longer bound together anymore, and they're starting to dissolve, and like, you can see it.
And it's weird
it's fascinating to watch, really. Like,
the further fragmentation of people who otherwise should be on the same side of the culture and the same side of the idea spectrum.
But they never. It's possible they never really were. They were both just anti-woke. And they were both bound together by what they saw out there and what they wanted to battle against. But Sam Harris and Douglas Murray and Joe Rogan have very different ideas of how the world should work, and what and what it means to be like, have integrity in this space.
Well, no, but what I mean is like both sides of the fragmented like space now are accusing each other, are taking issue with each other for the same reason.
Right.
So like Dave Smith or people in that camp are thinking that Douglas is being woke. And Douglas is saying, no, you're being woke, captured by a new woke right, which is all this tribal stuff. And I'm just like, this is just wild. And it's really weird that it's Jews, anti-Semitism in Israel that broke the mold.
No, I mean, you asked me how I felt. I mean, I think really, like, maybe this is like a little abstract, but like, it feels like the spectrum is separating and folding in on itself. And it's all going to come out to this new definition of what right and left and center is. And it feels very disturbing and ungrounding and like a little bit scary. And like when I think 3 years into the future of what the 2028 election will be like, and you think to yourself, like, how are people going to feel in 2028? Like, could a candidate like AOC seem like an amazing idea? Like For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like for sure.
Well, it almost is like the era of irrationalism too. What I think is,
it's all, yeah.
I had this thought today, and I thought to myself, okay, out of like, this is not me. This is me pretending to be smart. Out of like feudalism and kings, you finally get enlightenment and a free society and capitalism, right? This is the cycle of history. Capitalism, what does it do? Generates enormous prosperity, raises standards of living, increased wealth. Then what happens? Increased wealth, entitlement, right? What's the phrase? Hard times make hard men, men make good times make soft men make hard times. So capitalism builds up all this excess wealth. Then people start to say, hey, we should redistribute some of this wealth. That's not fair. Inequity. Blah, 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 blah. So you get a big surge of left-wing politics to say this distribution of wealth isn't fair. And some people are entitled, and we need to like create an entitlement culture and distribute it. So you get like left-wing Marxism, communism in response to the capitalism. And then that woke thing goes so far that the next phase, fascism, where you're starting to see people say like, this is disgusting, all this LGBTQ excess, crazy ideas of left-wing wokeism gone amok. And instead of the response being rationalism and back to sort of like free society and capitalism and like rational ideas and all that kind of stuff, I'm seeing a different response, which was fascism. And it seems to be, I'm not the biggest history buff, but like even in Nazi Germany, remember, like it was the rise of like, fascism was sort of born out of those competing ideologies, and communism was one of them that needed to be beat out. And fascism was, they were like saying how like one of the things that they're accusing Jews of all these horrible left-wing ideas. It's the Jews that are for open borders. It's the Jews that are for radical feminism. They're behind all this terrible left-wing stuff. That's what the right-wing anti-Semites are saying today. And so I'm scared of this rise of sort of like a fascistic like bent and impulse in the culture, that they're willing to let go of principles and civil liberties because the woke stuff is just too out of control. So let's just go there. And I'm not attributing it, everyone's the obvious point wants to point the finger at Trump, but that's not where I'm going with it. I just see it as a movement that people are going to start to say, you know what? Like, we can do extreme crazy things. We like, as you push the Overton window, we can say whatever we want. Yeah. We can be transgressive, cool. But now it's like when I'm seeing what they, just follow, the canary in the coal mine being the Jews, like, that's Douglas has always pointed that out. Like, you tell me what you accuse the Jews of, and I'll tell you what you're guilty of. And the Jews and anti-Semitism being the sign of a society in decline. That's where the fascism starts to come in. So when you say a couple of years into the future, I'm like, hey, like people's sensibilities now are not going to be so abject to just doing horrible things.
Things are getting weird. Like, like I'm working. I mean. People are using AI to a disturbing degree at work to generate new ideas. Mm-hmm. Like AI has only been around for like 2 years. Like in 3 years, like things are going to be very weird in terms of our relationship to work and money and creativity.
Oh no, you're in a dark place, Michael.
I had kind of like a dark vision over the last days of Passover, and I was thinking. I mean, I'm not gonna share how dark it got. Mm-hmm. I'll say this: all right, I'll get dark for a second. The Hungarian Jews were sent to Auschwitz on. I might have the details wrong about this, but on Passover, either the first days or the second days, the Hungarian and
you're not a historian.
I'm not a historian. Exactly. But I was just thinking like about those people, like in their minds, maybe thinking like, okay, like when we come back to our houses after they take us wherever they want to take, like I got to remember to do that dish or do that. And like, just like being so totally unaware of like where this stuff was going. Mm-hmm. They had been unaware, and they were unaware right until the end. And just having the humility to remember, like, we're just people, and there's a future coming, and we are just unaware of what's coming. But you and me, we talk about this all the time. We see the comments, and like I'm not saying there's gonna be another Holocaust cover, but like I don't think that at all. Like that's not at all what I think is coming. But something will come, and like we're seeing like little wrinkles here and there, and to me, seeing Sam Harris and Douglas Murray dissolving from Joe Rogan felt like a weird wrinkle that was like, what the heck is going on? And no, I am dark because it feels very disturbing to me, frankly.
Well, here's what I'll say, maybe then in as a point of optimism. The excesses of the woke left, the excesses of the left, which became that wokeness, that eventually the bubble burst, I think, in 2024. The reason it got so bad is because the rational minds in the left of center space would not confront it and call it out. They just kept leaning into it. They just kept going with it until it became, the threshold, the fever pitch, whatever you call it, that burst, and it destroyed itself. I think the right is doing a far better job at confronting the excesses and the problems in its midst, given the conversations you and I are having right now, and so many people, and this infighting, as disturbing as it is, it's like we're holding the foot to the fire of like really seeing this for like what it is and not being afraid to call out, even if it's technically on our side or we all voted for the same person in some respects, in the umbrella. It's like, hey, we need to do some hygiene here, basic hygiene, without having to compromise our values on free speech. We can still have standards of like ideas that are, worth hearing out, and maybe ideas that are debunkable and easily, maybe don't add value. But everyone's allowed to speak, but we can also just, that part of it is free speech goes both ways. Allowed to speak and allowed to confront those bad ideas. And I would just say, like, they're doing a far better job very quickly at noticing it and confronting.
I think it's important to hold two things at once. I think it's important to hold the undeniable. We saw an undeniable visual when Joe Biden got on stage at that debate. We were like, we saw it with our own eyes. We know what's going on. To me, there was an undeniable visual of seeing Joe Rogan and Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray. There's this momentum against whatever Douglas Murray is, and there's a momentum behind whatever Joe Rogan and Dave Smith are. And I'm not talking about anti-Semitism. I'm just talking about like
popularity,
whatever it is. There's an energy, and it's important to recognize that. I think I'm not saying it's an anti-Semitic energy. There's just some sort of energy gathering,
a resonance.
Yeah, there's a resonance of something, and I think Jews probably picked up on it first. I'm not saying it's anti-Semitism, but it's something. And then what you're saying though, but we're not powerless, and we have the power to question it and to fight it, and to do what we can with it.
And I think in the Rogan verse, I think from his perspective, it's likely all the Jew reactions from our community, I think it's being processed by him and that community as the same exact thing as when they spoke about black on black crime or other ideas that made the left and the woke people go crazy before. I think the Jewish community, pro-Israel community, has to be aware of that history leading up to this. Like it reeks of that a little bit, even though I don't think it's the same thing. It's not the same kind of hysteria. I think it's different, and it can be expounded upon and explained, but I think it requires it to be explained because it does echo some of that. It reeks of that familiarity of the people who put an N-word compilation video of Joe together and said, we got him. Joe's going to have a meltdown. We got Joe. And we all knew, who were on the side of integrity, that was nonsense and bullshit. And we called it out and stuck with Rogan through that as fans and people who were saying this is just a smear tactic campaign. Yeah. So this looks maybe in a too similar way like that, even though I don't think it is. Yeah. I'm not overreacting to anti-Semitism, but I'm not underreacting to it. I'm reacting. So I think that just requires the awareness of that, of how that's being how it's being perceived in his world, because we all came out of this woke leftist left-wing excess that Douglas pointed out, that we finally, the right wing's got some mojo back. Remember, he said that. Yeah. And it's like, just remember, don't employ the same tactics that the left used, because it's going to all look like that. That when people spoke about, when Sam Harris got on, or whoever, and Ben Shapiro spoke about, fatherless families in the black community, and that's a real problem. There's a real problem of left, and the left just went hysterical, racist, 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 racist. Like when Jews do similar kinds of things in the topic of Israel, even though I don't think it's the same situation or context, but if you use the same kind of tactic or temperament or posture, that's how it's going to be processed and filtered. And he's like, okay, well, now I've upset this group, just another group I've upset. I'm going to weather this storm. I know what I believe. I'm not hateful, and it is what it is, So we just you have to be discerning in those cases. And I think don't confuse curiosity or even ignorance with maliciousness. Like I think too many people in our camp do that. Somebody's curious or wrong or misguided or something like that, and we immediately jump to they're evil, or we all knew the whole time he's always been a G, just showing his cards. I'm like, I think that's a huge mistake to jump to that conclusion because, of what I just said. So I don't know. Maybe I lean more optimistic in general, but I know what you mean.
I'm not. It's not really a question of being optimistic and pessimistic. I don't know. Maybe it is.
I think you're more pessimistic.
I think what?
Well, talking it out, yeah.
No. I think talking it out helped me articulate about this storm that we feel brewing. I think that's why this whole thing.
It's that sense also where man, Jews, we really are alone.
I know. I mean, you know what? Said another way, I'm extremely optimistic about our future and about Israel's future. And I'm not. It's not like I'm a fatalist about this.
Right.
I'm very optimistic, but I'm also paying attention to what's
that there'll
going
be pain,
on.
that there's going to be pain involved. Yeah, you're aware of the future pain that seems imminent, and
I don't even know if it's pain. I just think we're
struggle
for. I don't even think struggle. We're headed for, I think, a more insane, unsettling time than we've ever experienced in this country. And I don't know. I'm not even saying so painful. I'm just saying we're even gonna look back at now and be like, at least things were or
you think there's an inevitable inevitable chaos that will ensue as we step into this, as people get less and less rational and more swayed by this stuff.
It's how it feels. And and again, you're right. And to end on an optimistic note, that doesn't mean we have to be pessimistic about it. It doesn't mean we
and I think we're strong enough. We can weather it. We can do it. And then at the same time, it's like you get off Twitter and remember Twitter's not real life, but it's starting to feel that way.
No, yeah, definitely get off Twitter.
Yeah.
I've been spending more time on it because of the Natasha clip and everything.
Yeah.
But it's crazy. Also is Dave, if you're on my Twitter feed, Dave Smith is the most important person on earth. I don't think that's true.
Right.
Right.
Well, it's just like whatever sliver you're in.
Yeah.
It's true. It's you could spend all day on Twitter like that. It's a nasty little playground.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Twitter, we'll end with this. You saw Kanye's tweet?
Oh yeah, good. I'm glad we remembered. So in other news, Kanye sucked his cousin's dick when he was
until he was 14. We don't know for how long.
That explains it. Oh,
I have a take on it.
It's gonna be so bizarre.
No, it's not so bizarre. It's okay. Without taking anything away from so Kanye tweeted he put a song out about his cousin, and unrelated to that, he had also like you said, sucked his cousin's dick until he was 14.
Well,
that was just a lesson.
In the thing, he's like, tweet sent. Yes, I did this.
And Twitter went crazy.
Yeah.
Here's my call about it.
This is the line for people. The anti-Semitism and the swastika is fine, but this one, hell no.
But this is Kanye's art. Yeah. Not taking any accountability away from what he has caused in this country and the suffering he's caused, and the way he'll be remembered should be awful, I personally think.
Yeah.
But he experiments with the most shocking things that will get you into trouble. And so it began with the MAGA hat. It went on to he was justifying slavery and being pro-life. And I think he was performing in public with his reputation, I think, as a performance artist to to do this experiment publicly with his own life and his marriage and his family, it's not balanced. But I do think it was an artistic project, and what he landed on was the Jews. That was like the pinnacle of his achievement. Can I say that I love Hitler? Can I wear the cool? Can I do that? Like what will happen to me as a performance artist? And I think this only proves it. Like this is, to his credit, people say a lot of shocking things all the time. This is shocking. And no one has ever revealed this. No celebrity in all of the trauma porn we have of like, I was the victim of this and the victim of that, and I did this and that. No one has ever said something like this. And to me, that's the same thing he did with the Jews. Like no one has ever done anything like that
before. The sacred cows, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch. That's my take on it.
I don't necessarily disagree. Only to add that I think he's bipolar and mentally ill, and that's where it's all coming from. This sense of megalomania, of what I can do, like this Jesus-like figure who can say the things that stir the people, that get people crazy. I think he has a sense of that in himself, which is rooted in mental illness.
I think he probably is mentally ill. I think a lot of
undoubtedly, and that's not. I'm not taking accountability away from his actions. I mean, what they've caused a lot of harm, but I think that's underlying. I mean, that's a very large component of that contributes to this kind of thing, and it pairs up with his. If he wasn't a massive celebrity with all the hits, he would just be a random ass weirdo on Twitter tweeting weird stuff and dressing like a racist, weird anti-Semite on Twitter. In other words, like he built a massive audience not on this stuff. He started doing this stuff after he had tons of hit songs and tons of hit records and built a platform and built an audience that loved his music. Then he started getting more declined and mentally.
Just his music. He was a sneaker designer. He had a lot of stuff going on besides just music. He was
his creative stuff. I'm saying the provocateur stuff is not what built his audience. He used his audience and then provoked the world based on what he was standing on from that platform of visibility.
I think he was provoking his audience the same way he made sneakers for his audience. He was provoking his audience. Like,
in other words, but I don't think this is
as a creative act.
I don't think this is what Kanye has always done. In other words, you could say, yeah, he pushes the envelope musically and with fashion, but to start to get racist and bizarre and anti-Semitic, that's a whole different beast. If he hadn't had that audience, like he would just be some obscure racist.
You can't do that until you're the biggest artist in the world. Like this was his next project,
It's a project, but I'm just saying it comes out of I just think it comes from a slightly different source. And therefore, the reason it's resonant is because he built a huge name and brand for himself off of legitimate art and fashion and endeavors. You know what I mean? It wasn't like all this time everyone was responding to, No, there was, of course, the temperamental nature to him that was pushing the boundaries. And getting on stage and saying, Beyonce should have had the best thing of all time. And he just does that. It's all what's driving it, but it's just gotten increasingly more, I think, rooted in mental illness, which contributes to the megalomania. Why wouldn't he think he can say whatever he wants and he's on top of the world? It feeds into that like a drug. That's what the mental illness is doing. But I would say, this is all perfectly. Everything he's saying is perfectly consistent with being totally manic depressive. That's what I'm saying. You don't think so? I just think it is. It's like, these are the musings of somebody who has delusions of grandeur.
I think there's
delusions of grandeur is what I'm saying.
I think there's more in there. We can stop there.
Yeah,
we've had this conversation many times.
Someone should check out. You should check in with his cousin and just verify and find out what's going on. But I don't see the brilliance and the genius in what you're saying. I just think he gets away with saying ridiculous things because he's a huge celebrity, and so he keeps doing that. It's the method to the madness thing that you're talking about is a little bit of a creature of someone who's responding to cultural pressure and then trying to push against it. Sure. Generally speaking, I don't quite disagree. Let's put on the MAGA hat but it's not rooted in some consistent principle other than provocation.
But I'm saying this tweet, I think, supports my argument that there is a consistent principle of.
So what's the next thing after this?
I'm saying he
can find it.
He's brilliant. He'll think of something even more shocking than that.
Which is,
if you're going to be a provocateur at the highest levels, you have to keep doing it, and he keeps doing it, and there's something to that.
What do you think he'll do? Convert to Judaism and become a controversial Zionist?
Yeah, maybe. I hope so.
Yeah, Release an album with Nissan Black and Amari Stoudemire.
Thank you, Hashem will take him.
Anyway, that's a wrap for this episode of Ami's House. Reacting, unpacking, doing what we do, Michael, contributing to the internets. Good talking to you. I always feel better. Anyway.
Good luck to you and your family.
And my cousin. All right. That's a wrap, folks.